So we are setting our sights on Yud Tes Kislev. We got some time, but we're going to probably we're going to be preparing ourselves until then. We got plenty and plenty of material. There's thousands and thousands of pages to understand about Yud Tes Kislev. So we chose a particular mimer, which is in a sefer called Maluket, Maimarim Maluket, which means the Rebbe, of all of his over 1,000 Maimarim that he said, he gathered a handful of them, edited them, and put them in a special set. These are like classically known as the Rebbe's Maimarim. And this one is from Vav. It is from the year 1966. Chaf Vav was an incredible Farbrengen that year. Some of you may have heard of the teaching called in Yanush Shel Torah Chasidis.
Oh wow!
Right, it's like a kuntris that they already put out special. It's basically explains the unique quality of Chasidis, the Torah of Chasidis, over and above, Kabbalah and how it aligns with the other four parts of Torah, namely Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, Kabbalah, and Chasidis. And he sort of explained how this is an eternal part of Hashem's Torah that just in the later generations was revealed. It's quite in depth, and it's one of like the most fantastic things. We probably will try and get to it after we finish this, if we have time.
Wow.
But the point I wanted to make was that whole awesome thing was in the same Farbrengen in the year that this mimer came out. He said this mimer and that and many other things, just to point out like the genius of this person. Like each of these things, if you made them in your entire life, you would be considered a genius. They just kind of rattled both of these two things off in one Farbrengen. I know, it's just mind-blowing. Anyway, so with no further ado, let's get into it. First of all, just as a point out a little bit more ado. That when it comes to the Rebbe's Mimer, you guys have been doing the review in the evenings on the Torah Or? How's that been going?
I'm actually doing it. I'm reading it and translating it.
Okay, excellent. That's the plan. So I just want to redouble our efforts on that 8 o'clock. I want you to come in with this mimer and crack into it with a pencil and a dictionary and this kind of a parallel to this class. The point is that you're going to find a very great difference in style, right? The Alter Rebbe's Maimarim are much more, leave a lot more to the imagination. He doesn't say everything. He expects you to sort of put the puzzle together, almost like a Gemara. The Rebbe's Maimar is much more like explanatory, but on the other hand, so it's like a simpler language, I would say. On the other hand, the concepts are much, much deeper. And if you understand them properly, you're going to break your head on trying to figure out what the Rebbe is saying, not sort of how he's saying it. All right, but it starts off more or less simple. Here we go. Pada Bshalom nafshi mikravli ki v'rabim hayu imadi. Right, it's a pasuk in Tehillim, which translates that my soul was redeemed in peace. Pada Bshalom nafshi mikravli, from the war against me. Krav is war, like Krav Maga. Ki v'rabim hayu imadi. Why? Because the many were with me. Right? So, in other words, he won the war because the many were with him, says David HaMelech. Kosev Rabbeinu Azakin. The Alter Rebbe writes, what's that, you got me? Page Mem Hey. Ma.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we just read. Pada Bshalom. Yep, that's it. Right. Kosev Rabbeinu Azakin. The Alter Rebbe writes, oh wait, can you give Baruch one of these copies? Right behind you there. Thank you. Baal HaGeula V'Asimcha, right? The Alter Rebbe, this mimer was said on Yud Tes Kislev, so the Rebbe calls the Alter Rebbe the Baal HaGeula V'Asimcha, the one who is redeemed and whose day of rejoicing it is. And quote, writes the Alter Rebbe in a famous letter, he says, V'kashakarisi b'sefer Tehillim, b'pasik pada b'shalom nafshi. The Alter Rebbe, upon his release, he writes to all the Chassidim for all the world to come. He writes, as I was reading in the book of Tehillim, in this pasuk, Pada B'Shalom, right, so he was in chapter Nun Hey, reading this exact pasuk, Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, my soul was redeemed to peace. Kodem, he's chalti pasuk shla'achrav, and he's very exact. He says, before I started reading the next pasuk, he was like holding in this pasuk, Yetzasi B'Shalom me'Hashem Shalom. I went out in peace from God, who is God of peace. Right? One of Hashem's names is Shalom. Hashem Shalom, right? So he's basically saying that in this pasuk was exactly where he was holding when he was released from his famous imprisonment Everyone's here is aware of the imprisonment and the release of Yutes Kislev. Baruch, you heard about this before? Okay. Yehonatan, you know what the Yutes Kislev release is? Basically, in short, I'll give you a little prep. In this time, the Alter Rebbe had taken upon himself to start to reveal Hasidus in a way that had never been done before, i.e., in a way of Chochmah, Bina, and Das, explaining all of the secret mystical underpinnings which the Baal Shem Tov only alluded to, and the Maggid of Mezrich only alluded to. The Rebbes at that time were the ones who were in possession of like the systematic knowledge of the Panimius Torah, but they hadn't yet been given permission to reveal that systematic knowledge to the world.
Who's the Alter Rebbe?
The Alter Rebbe is the first Rebbe of Chabad. So generally, when Hasidus was revealed to the world, the first Hasidic master was the Baal Shem Tov, right? Can you back up just a little bit so I can see him? And thank you. And then his disciple was the Maggid of Mezrich, right? And those two are, we call like the grandfathers of the Hasidic movement in general. And then the Maggid of Mezrich had many, many students, which is what's the cause of, all the different Hasidic groups that you have today. They were all students of the Maggid, or they were students of the Maggid. And then one of them, and the head of them, he was in fact appointed to be the head of the society, and he was the Rav, where he wrote a Shulchan Aruch, and everything went through him, was the Alter Rebbe. So he was the first, that's when Chabad started, right? He was like, we're in Parshas Lech Lecha, it's like the beginning of the Jews. Alter Rebbe was the beginning of Chabad Hasidus, and there were 7 generations of Chabad Hasidus that ensued from the Alter Rebbe. What was unique about the Alter Rebbe is what I'm explaining now, is that he did something very radically different than what the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, his predecessors, did, which is that he started to explain the mysteries. The Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, they just sort of manifested the mysteries. They themselves were miracle workers. They were making miracles. They were giving little pieces of the Hasidic insights and showing the Jewish people that there was this whole other aspect of Torah that they were unaware of, but they didn't actually break it down and like write it all in a book. Right? The Alter Rebbe was the first person who did that. In fact, what was the book? It was the book of the Tanya, which he had written, but he had not yet printed, right? If I'm not mistaken, or he had just printed it. There was an association with he had already brought out the 53 chapters of the Tanya.
It was the first couple chapters had been printed when he was put in.
They had already been printed?
Yeah, because when they questioned him in the jail about
but the first
chapter.
First 53, and then
they would already printed the first 53 before
they were out because they say that he was in jail for 53 days, punishment for the 53.
That I understand, but I'm not sure if the actual got out. Okay, I think you're right though. It definitely wasn't printed, but it was written. Printed, it was only printed much later, but he had already sort of hatched, and certain people have seen. The point is the fact that he even wrote it down and brought it out was already a breach, so to speak, of the previous methodology of the Hasidic masters, where they were not revealing the secrets in such a detailed, explanatory manner. They were just sort of bringing out verses and showing some mysteries. So when the Alter Rebbe had sort of broken through, he was immediately put in jail. How did the jailing take place? So, Baruch, you listening? Mm-hmm. So the idea is that there was not only the whole Hasidic movement at that time was extremely frowned upon by the general Jewish world, because not only revealing the deep secrets in a way of Chabad was radical, but even the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid was extremely radical, revealing any secrets, even at the sort of smaller level that the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid revealed them. It was already in breach of contract, so to speak, because there are open Mishnahs and there's a Gemara and it's brought down in Halacha that we're not supposed to learn the mysteries of the Torah. It was at that time it was against the law. Ein Dorshin Ma'aseh Bereshis, right? There's a Mishnah in Chagiga. It says you're not allowed to learn the secrets of creation unless it's done in very, very exacting ways. For example, you have to do it only with one person at a time, and that person has to already be basically have found it himself, and you're just sort of sharing like what they call the Roshei Prakim, just giving him like an indication. But it was literally a secret tradition for thousands of years. So the Baal Shem Tov came out, started revealing it. All of the regular Orthodox Judaism, primarily in Lithuania, which was like sort of the crown of Torah at that time, they radically opposed him to the point that they excommunicated him, and they put a ban on all Hasidim, that they couldn't daven in their shuls, they couldn't do business with them. There were even Hasidim that were actually murdered in this whole crazy infighting of the Jewish people. And ultimately, when the Alter Rebbe was already 3 generations in of this Hasidic wave, they sort of had enough, and they decided that they captured the head of that generation's Hasidic movement, the Alter Rebbe, and they made a libel against him to the Russian government that he was a spy and working for the Turkish Empire in order to bring down the Russians, who at that time were fighting, and it was their main opponent. How did they get their heads around such a crazy idea? Because the Alter Rebbe was very vocally and successfully gathering tons and tons of funds in order to send them to Eretz Yisrael. If you look at the end of the Tanya, there's letters upon letters upon letters of him encouraging the Jewish people to send money to Eretz Yisrael.
When it was the Ottoman Empire.
And it was the Ottoman Empire. So they saw, the libelous, what we call the Misnagdim, the opponents of the Alter Rebbe, they knew what the Alter Rebbe was doing, but they just wanted to stop him, and they figured out how to, like, it's what's called the ends justify the means, right? That they knew what they were doing was a lie, but they felt that taking down the Alter Rebbe under any circumstances was appropriate. So they essentially said that he was a Turkish spy, and he was sending money to the Ottoman Empire to fight against the Russians. And they said he thinks that he's like, the king of the Jews, and he's created a whole situation where, like, the temple, his shul is like the New Jerusalem, whatever. They basically, so they arrested him in a very heinous way, right? It was like the black wagon, which was reserved for the most heinous criminals. There's many stories on Yutes Kislev. There's actually a minhag to tell over the whole tale. This is not the forum for it, but ultimately they did capture him, and they put him in sort of solitary confinement, and there was a death sentence against him. In other words, which was the intention of the Misnagdim, was a capital offense. They wanted to just kill him, right? Let's get rid of the Jews, except they were Jews, right? And so, again, as Avraham pointed out, I'm not sure where Avraham went. He threw in some wisdom and took off. But the Alter Rebbe had written 53. The Tanya in general is 53 chapters. Right, so he had brought it out into the world, and he wound up. He was in jail for 53 days, and when he was in there, it was his forebears came to him, the Maggid of Mezrich and the Baal Shem Tov, who had already passed away. They appeared to him in the prison in physical bodies. There's a whole story how we know that they were actually in physical bodies. They just like came back to life and came to him in this little jail cell, and essentially after a little dialogue, they told him that he was in there for spreading Hasidus in a new way, and that he should continue when he gets out. So now brings us back to the Maimer, Para Bshalom Nafshi. He was day 53, right, corresponding to the 53 chapters of Tanya he was basically going to break the world's kalim with this new, I can't say break the world's kalim against his shita, but he was going to reveal this new teaching to the world, and he was reading chapter 55 in Tehillim on the verse that my soul was redeemed in peace because from this war, because the many were with me. And as he was reading this verse, before he got to the next verse, his soul was redeemed in peace from God of peace. Right? That's what he writes in this letter. Okay, that's the background story.
That's what Yetzati Bshalom.
Usually when you say Bshalom, so Bshalom usually means death. Right?
Yeah.
So is it because he was sentenced to death, or is that just
Wasn't it Shalom mean stuff?
La Shalom is wishing you well, but Va Shalom.
That's the opposite.
I don't know. I'm not sure that. I don't think you can read that into here. It's just what he's just saying, because it's not. It's just saying that maybe. But I'm just saying it reads fine in the Pshat. Pada b'shalom. He's saying in shalom, my soul was I was redeemed. In other words, he could have been redeemed in warfare. He could have redeemed in many ways, and he was redeemed in peace. So b'shalom is just a natural way of saying that. I'm sure every letter can be learned out. So I'm not negating what you're saying, but just we don't have to get caught up in that. But the point being is that that's the background story. 3 lines down. Move on mizeh. it's understood from here, that the very meaning of this verse, it's very connected with his redemption. In other words, it's not accidental that it happened. It's not accidental that the Alter Rebbe wrote it in a letter and publicized it for all to see. It must be that there's something essentially connected with this verse to the whole concept of what was taking place on a universal scale of his redemption from prison. Because I don't know if I made the point clear, but his redemption and his release was also sort of permission granted from God and from the higher courts and so forth, that this level of Hasidus was now permitted to be in the world. Because the reality is, even though the Misnagdim were bad guys, and even though the Misnagdim had negative intent, nothing can happen to a Rebbe unless Hashem wants it to happen. So actually, the Alter Rebbe was culpable of a certain crime, right? Not the crime of going against the Russian government, not the crime of being a spy and helping the Ottoman Empire. He was against the crime of revealing aspects of Torah that were not allowed to be revealed. And therefore, this whole physical reality set up around him to stop him from doing that. And that's why he wound up in jail.
Wow.
So the fact that he got out of jail was also a permission granted from on high, that he had sort of somehow wrangled his way to being able to reveal aspects of Torah that had never been revealed before in the world. That's why we're so excited about Chabad. That's why we're so excited about Yutes Kislev and the Alter Rebbe, because he basically forged a path which was before him was blocked and sealed and prohibited to enter. And through his Mesiras Nefesh and this whole experience, he basically busted out of jail, not only himself, but the secrets of the Torah. And he gave it, and he allowed them to be in our hands. So all of our lives as Hasidim, and hundreds of years before us, it's all based on his, singular effort to allow this Torah to be in the world. So he writes that this very verse, it's not accidental, it's all tied up with his release. As we just explained, that his redemption is simultaneous, is synonymous, with what's called the hafatzas hamayanos, the spreading of the well springs. Right? What is the word hafatzas hamayanos chutza? Where does that come from?
The Keter Center.
That's right. The Baal Shem Tov had a soul aliyah, right? And he wrote a letter about it to his brother-in-law, Gershon Kitov. And he explained that he was going higher and higher in the spiritual dimensions until he came before millions of souls were following him. There was a joy that's indescribable. And he explains it all in the beginning of his Sefer. And he says when he got to the chamber of Melech HaMashiach, he asked the famous question, Ei Masai Ka'asemar, when are you coming? And the Mashiach answered him, when your well springs will spread forth to the outside. Remember, when Hasidus, your teachings, Baal Shem Tov, will be finally tasted by every single Jew, that will be when I'm coming. So the whole mission of the Hasidic movement was to spread these well springs. The Alter Rebbe was the first person that actually, started the official spreading in a way that was intended by Mashiach. Because just spreading the well springs of the actual Baal Shem Tov of the Maggid of Mezrich, as I said, that's not the full well springs, because they didn't really explain it. It was just a setup. So the first time that the well springs even really, in truth, began to be spread was by the Alter Rebbe. That's why we sort of isolate Chabad Hasidus amongst all the others, because it's the significant one in terms of the actual fulfillment of Mashiach's request. So Alter Rebbe's Geula was synonymous with this spreading of the well springs of Torah's Hasidus ad lechutza. And to what's called the chutza is a very important term here, which also it justifies what I was saying. Why specifically Chabad? So many Hasidic groups, so many students of the Maggid. Why are we saying the Alter Rebbe particularly fulfilled the Baal Shem Tov's mandate from Mashiach to spread chutza? Because spreading the wellspring chutza means to the outside, it means the lowest place. And quite frankly, the beginning of the lowest place is the human mind. And so the whole idea what the Alter Rebbe did by explaining Hasidus, right, that is the definition of chutza. If you don't start by it coming into human comprehension, you haven't even begun to go chutza, right? It's not just about that it should reach some Jew in Kathmandu and Timbuktu. The idea is that in every one of us, right, the mysteries of the Torah are beyond human comprehension. So for them to sort of go out to the lowest places, it starts by a human being understanding them. That was impossible, even in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, until the Alter Rebbe was divinely ordained to encloak, right, and enclose infinite wisdom into something that can be intelligent design that a human can understand. So that's why he sort of captured the concept of Mashiach's mandate of chutzah. Of course, there's much more chutzah to go after it becomes intelligent and understandable. Now it has to go into every single place, even in the lowest person. But what goes into every place in the lowest person? Something which can be grasped by the mind. That's the beginning of a chutzah, which is why we know that the Alter Rebbe sort of owned this mission. Okay, moving right along. Kiyadua, as it's known, Asher Sibas Hakitzrog v'Hamaisar, the Mata, that the cause of the accusations against him and the imprisonment Lamata down here below in the physical world, Hayamitzara Shakla Vitaria Lamaila. It was from the conversation. Shakla Vitaria is a way of saying like the back and forth conversation above in the heavenly worlds. Al derech hafatzas razik Torah bizgalia. In terms of spreading the secrets of the Torah in a revealed way. Like the angels in the heavenly courts were having a strong conversation about this, and they were leaning to, no, you're not allowed then, you're not allowed now. Right? But to the point that, but there was already like a breach in their system, because the Baal Shem Tov had already pressed the buttons, and the Maggid even more. So there was already like a big shtorim in heaven that there was something going on that was not allowed to be happening. So when the Alter Rebbe started doing it in his level, that was it. They grabbed him and put him in jail. You know, the Baal Shem Tov and Maggid didn't get thrown in jail, right? There was different accusations against them. And yes, they were put in cherem, and yes, they had difficulties. But so the idea of like taking the Rebbe and like just literally stopping him and putting him in a room and killing him, that did not happen to the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid, because they didn't push the envelope this far.
Wait, what was he accused of?
In the lower worlds and the higher worlds, because there's like this parallel thing going on, right? There was one story on Earth. He was accused, as I said before, of rebellion against the Russian government because he was sending money to the Ottoman Empire. But that was all happening like as a sort of secondary cause to the higher spiritual reason, which is that he was spreading Hasidus more than he should have. Right? So that's what he's trying to say, that this was the conversation and the real reason for his imprisonment. Hapsak din lamayla, lafitz razi Torah, and when they all sat around in heaven and over this debate, and they finally made the psak din above, that okay, we're going to let it out. What made them do that, by the way? If all these thousands of years they weren't going to let it out, why suddenly they said, okay, we're going to let it out? What pushed them to do it?
Hashem decided.
Yeah, but why didn't Hashem decide in the time of the Rashbi or Rabbi Akiva, whatever it might
necessary.
Anybody know the problems?
So the idea is really, it's because of the Alter Rebbe himself, like his willingness to die for it, right? And be taken to prison. Because by the way, one of the stories I didn't tell, there's hundreds of them, is that there was a little scenario whereby the Russians came for him with the black wagon, ready to take him in, and he jumped out the window and ran away. And they didn't catch him. So then there was a whole story ensued, like he was debating, should I let them catch me or not? And you know, the famous story of Rabbi Shmuel Munkis, which one of his major Hasidim, he said, should I let them take me? And Rabbi Shmuel Munkis said, yes, 100%. He said, where did you get the audacity to say such a thing? They're going to kill me in there. Because that was the Alpi Teva, they were going to kill him, right? So a lot of evidence against him. He was collecting millions and millions and millions and sending it to the Ottoman Empire. Just that it was going to Eretz Yisrael for like people to learn Torah, but they didn't know that. So he said, he said nothing can happen to you. Or he said like this, he said, because either way, it should be like this. If you're a Rebbe, nothing can happen to you. And if you're not a Rebbe, you deserve to be killed for taking the pleasure away of this world from thousands and thousands of Jews. Kind of a famous and awesome statement, meaning to say when you learn Hasidus, you can't anymore enjoy the physical world like you once did before you knew the deeper secrets and the purpose of creation. The point being, after that, he decided to go willingly and be captured, which means he literally, like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? He's like, Moshe said, like, you know, if you're not going to like save the Jews, then take me. This was an act of unbelievable Mesiras Nefesh. And the Alter Rebbe did such an act. He basically said, like, I'm going to teach this Torah if it kills me, because it has to be done. And really, as you said, there's really two reasons. One, without Hasidus, we might have like dangled into death. We needed like a jolt of life-giving Torah, because the Gullus had gotten so hard, but really it's more than that. The Torah of Chabad Hasidus in particular is really called the Torah of Mashiach. And what he was really saying is that because the Baal Shem Tov already gave enough Hasidus out in order to, so to speak, save the life of the Jewish people. If we would have just had the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, we would have made it as a Jewish people. But the Alter Rebbe said, I don't want to just make it. We want Mashiach now. And I'm going to bring out the Torah of Mashiach, and if it kills me, I'm going to bring it out. So when the heavenly angels saw the literal Mesiris Nefesh of the Alter Rebbe, that's what changed their mind, and that's what allowed them to. So we owe Mashiach, basically, to the Alter Rebbe, is what you have to understand. That's where we don't take Yud Tes Kislev lightly. We call it Chag HaChagim, the holiday of all holidays, right? And that means that Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and Purim, they're all holidays under the banner, because once you have Mashiach's Torah, then it redefines the rest of the Torah, right? And yes, they still think we're crazy for talking like this. They thought the Alter Rebbe was crazy. They thought the Baal Shem Tov was crazy. Eventually, they're going to realize they're crazy.
The war's over.
Okay, anyway, when the Psak Din came to actually spread the Torah of Chassidus, the Adarabba, and on the contrary, the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, when he was in there, they said, when you get out, you should do it v'yeser seis v'yeser os. You should do it even more than you did it up until now. Mikamosha haya kodem hamasar. When that happened, then automatically nisbatel b'meila hadin lamata. Then all of a sudden, Russians forgot what the Alter Rebbe was doing in there. And sir, you can go. In other words, the mind of the nation is in Hashem's hands. So once the spiritual reason for his incarceration went away, he was immediately released, because they can't hold a Rebbe, right? It's only God was holding the Rebbe. When God decided to let the Rebbe go, they automatically let him out. And he came out to freedom. The Mizeh, move on from here, it's understood. Therefore, this line that he was reading at the moment of his release, all this is like of the highest spiritual echelons. Every moment, every day he was in there corresponded to a chapter of Tanya, all the stories. So the line that he said when he was in the middle of on his way out, and the fact that he wrote it down and printed it and told us, it has unbelievable significance to the entire ordeal and to the entirety of Torah Chassidus. Right? Therefore, this line, and that's why you're going to find there's dozens and maybe even hundreds of Maimarim from all the Rebbeim, from the Alter Rebbe and on, that start with the words Pada Bshalom Nafshi about Yud Tes Kislev, right? Because we've been celebrating Yud Tes Kislev in Chabad since the Alter Rebbe. And every single Rebbe after them wrote Maimarim about it, and many of them start with the words Pada Bshalom Nafshi for this reason. V'hine Amrazah. Okay, so now that was kind of like the introduction. The sages said, and we say the sages here, we're talking about the Gemara of Brachas. We're going to go into a little bit of a nigla point over here. That Pada B'Shalom Nafshi Mikravli, right? This verse existed before the Alter Rebbe, right? And there was explanations on what this verse means in the Gemara. And it says, Amar, what is really being said here? Redeem, my soul was redeemed in peace from the war, because the many were with me. So this is like the drasha. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, Kol ha'osek b'Torah ugmilus chasadim umispalim matzibor. Right? So this verse actually means, according to the Gemara, anyone who occupies themselves in Torah and good deeds and davens with a minyan, Ma'ale ani alav, I consider it upon him ke'ilu pada'ani li ubanai mibein umas ha'olam. I will consider it as if he redeemed me, says Hashem, and my children from amongst the nations of the world. So before we get to the Alter Rebbe and all that exciting stuff, this verse already had kind of a secret meaning, right? The simple back to David HaMelech is that he was simply in war. He was fighting actually against his son Bshalom, who staged a rebellion against David HaMelech. And the simple meaning of what David was writing about was that his soul is redeemed in peace from that war. But in Gemara of Brachas already, they explain that there's like a sort of drasha on this verse. And it really means who's being redeemed? Hashem and the Jewish people are being redeemed, right? Because of their occupation in Torah, Gemlus Chasadim, and davening with the tzibur. How did they get that out of this verse? We'll soon see. And therefore, according to this, now we're going to make a little game out of this. So in addition to the connection of this verse to the spreading of Chassidus, as this verse is kept in its simple meaning, right? Because in other words, that there was an actual war against the Alter Rebbe, you can make a clear parallel to this verse just in the story that we told before. But in addition to the connection of Yutes Kislev and the redemption of the Alter Rebbe in peace, in the simple meaning of the words, that there was an actual war against him, right? Because the verses never go out of their simple meaning, which is that he was literally redeemed in peace, right? It's also a shaykhs gamle in osek v'torah gmus chasadim mispali matziba. There's also a connection to Yutes Kislev and the redemption of Yutes Kislev to these three ideas of being occupied in Torah, gmus chasadim, and davening with a minyan, right? So since we're saying that Yutes Kislev is associated with this verse, and now we're saying that this verse also has to do with Torah, Avoda, and Gmus Chasadim, that means Yutes Kislev also has an immediate connection with those three things. I'll say it again, I just want to make sure that you guys did not understand that. Is that everyone following along what we just said right there? Did you get that last point? Yeah? Follow that or no? Could hear it again. Again, Pada Bshalom Nafshi we've established is a Yutes Kislev inyan, right?
Yes.
Why? On a simple level, because his soul was redeemed in peace. We don't have to go too much further than that. It's an obvious connection, right? But also, since the sages said that this verse has some hidden meaning about davening and learning and glus chasadim, so it must mean that Yutes Kislev also has an association with those three things. Because if Yutes Kislev is associated with that verse, and that verse has like an inner meaning of he who is occupied in Torah and glus chasadim and davening, it must mean that those three things are also very linked in with the redemption of Yutes Kislev and so forth, and the spreading of Hasidus as well. That's basically, it's not complicated. It's just the idea is not complicated. The method is a little bit. You follow, Avraham?
Sure. Sorry. I was a baby.
So you're just saying that the
Yutes Kislev is connected with those three things.
Yeah.
And we learn it from this verse and its connection with that verse.
yeah.
Okay. Moving right along. Moving right along. Base. Vehine perusha pashu b'kasav zehu. So now we're going to actually go and take a little deep dive and understand why that verse is connected with Torah, Gmus Chasadim, and davening with a minyan, because you obviously don't see it right off the bat, right? It's a drasha. So he says the simple meaning of this verse is Asher ki beravim hayu imadi, that when it says my soul was redeemed in peace because the many are with me, right? Who nesinas tam lepada b'shalom nafshi. The many were with me is a reason for why my soul is redeemed in peace, right? The simple meaning is, David is saying, my soul was redeemed in peace. Why? Because the many were with me, meaning to say that even the men of Bshalom, right, like his enemies, were actually took his side. So the words that the Harabim hayu imadi, the many were with me, is a reason for Pada B'Shalom. Yes? Hainu she'efshar liyos pediya ba'ofen shel milchama, which means you could be redeemed in a way of war, right? Ultimately, what happened, by the way, the story should be told. They let him out, the Alter Rebbe, like I said, like as soon as the accusations above disappeared, the accusations below disappeared, and they let him out like with the red carpet, right? He was 1 minute he had like a rebel against the government, and then the next minute they let him out with like honorable status, like he was like an honorable citizen in Russia, and even to the point that the Frierdiker Rebbe generations later was a schneerson. He used the honorable status that was given to the Alter Rebbe to like tell them like, who are you messing with? I have honorable status in this country, because when they let the Alter Rebbe out, they let him out with like a fanfare, right? Full pardon, right? With the blessings and everything.
He destroyed that name, and if your last name was Schneerson, you need to run for your life.
Until later, right? But I'm saying that the point is that he was redeemed literally in peace, right?
How come they changed their minds like so quick? I mean, what was their idea to give? I mean, I understand
he was interrogated by them.
Yeah.
And he blew their minds, basically.
With the Torah, no?
Yeah, and they basically, and even to the point that the Tsar actually came in and visited him, and he stood up, and he said, "Why?" And the Tsar came in dressed as a simpleton, because he didn't want to like give it away. And the Alter Rebbe stood up. He said, "Why are you standing up for me?" He said, "Because you're the king." He said, I said, I'm not the king. How do you know I'm the king? He said, because when you came in, the sphere of Malchus like came in with you. Whatever. He freaked everybody out. He was making miracle after miracle in there. The whole story was just a story of of him like breaking the rules of nature 24/7. The moon, there's literally like a Megillah, and as I said, what used to be the custom in Lubavitch, and it still officially is, it's just you don't see it so much like this anymore, that they would sit down on Yutes Kislev, just like we read the Megillah on Purim, they would sit there and they would just tell the story from beginning to end. And that would be like the Farbrengen. And there's like dozens and dozens of miraculous stories that happened in this whole tale from beginning to end. It's an unbelievable thing.
Wow.
I mean, everyone should read the book on it, right? We have the Sfarim, and you can like, what's that?
We can say some of the stories. Maybe that's what we do this year.
Oh, we definitely say the stories. I'm just saying, like, to say all the stories in order.
Let's do it. Why not?
Because we might, but I'm saying that what's also good about Yutes Kislev is arousing.
We can do it the day before if we want to.
We'll do it the day before. You know what, Avram? This is a Hakel year, and each Yid is supposed to find reasons to be a Hakel Yid. So I'm appointing you the days leading up to Yutes Kislev to find the material, gather all the Jews in the yeshiva and on the world, and do it.
Do you know where it's written?
Yeah, I'll get it to you. If you need materials, we'll load you up.
No,
Okay. Anyway, nice. Thank you. That's awesome. So anyway, the point is that's why they let him out, with such flying colors. But the point is that it's possible to be redeemed in war, in a warlike way. In other words, it could have been that like there was like the IDF came in with helicopters and broke through the wall and grabbed him and they're chasing him. That's not what happened. He was redeemed in peace. And the idea is that it's possible to be redeemed in a warlike way. What's the quality of being specifically redeemed in peace? That the verse says, Pada Bshalom, that's not a small thing, is that the many were with me. That's how you know whether the redemption is peaceful or warlike. Is that the many, i.e. the opponents, were on my side. Then you know you're going to have a redemption in peace. So when it says, my soul is redeemed in peace because the many were with me, because the many were with me is a reason why the redemption was peaceful. You get it, Baruch? Why was the soul redeemed in peace? Okay, so double down. So now we have to understand, what does it really mean on a deep level to be redeemed in peace? And a deeper understanding of what it means that the many were with me and therefore the redemption was peaceful. Okay. When this thing that we said from the Gemara of Brachas on this verse, remind me what it was again? What was the drasha in the Gemara of Brachas on the verse Pada Bshalom?
That Hakadosh Baruch Hu, he said that
he and his children will be redeemed in peace. Why? Because of occupation in Torah, Gemuz Chasadim, and davening with a minyan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to that drasha. According to the drasha of the Chazal on this verse, Kola Osek B'Torah Gemuz Chasadim Umispalim Tzibor. Rashi says, now Rashi gives us a little bit of understanding. How did you get that out of that verse? All it says is my soul was redeemed in peace. Where'd you get all that stuff? So Rashi explains, Torah, because the Kasiv, regarding Torah, it says, and we say loudly and publicly several times a week, Kol Nesivoseh Shalom. All of her pathways are peace. So we see that Torah is called Shalom, right? And Gemuz Chasadim Nami Shalom. Giving gifts, right, and acts of kindness is also called peace without much need for explanation. That's it creates peace in the world when you give. And when it says that he davening with the minyan, where do you get that out of the verse? That's when it says the many were with me. So again, it's like a drasha, right? It's saying that Pada B'Shalom, when you have Torah and Gemuz Chasadim, which are called Shalom, and you have the Rabbim are with me, which is the idea of davening with a minyan, okay? These three things create the idea that Hashem and his children will be redeemed from the exile in peace. It's a drasha, right? As Rashi explains there, Ki b'Rabbim hayu imadi, she's probably me. And the actually idea that the many were with me, it actually, even on the pshat level, does go on davening, because it says that the men of Abshalom davened for David. Right, so the whole idea, even on pshat level, of the many were with me, it doesn't just mean I'm gathering a minyan around me. The many were with me in the days of David meant the many opponents of his son Abshalom started davening for him. Hainu, which means to say shegimel inyanim elu, these three things, Torah, gemulus chasadim, v'tefilah b'tzibur, and davening with a minyan, right? Mechalkam lebeis chalukos. We're really dividing them into two parts. You have Torah, gemulus chasadim is the union of shalom, because we said Torah is called shalom and giving is called shalom, and tefilah b'tzibur, whereas davening with the minyan is called the many were with me. So now we're seeing these are really three things, which are two in categories. Two of them are called shalom. One of them is called the many were with me. We have to understand why these three things are divided into two categories. These are just like leading questions we're going to get to at the end. And we also have to understand that why does the verse say anyone who occupies themselves in Torah and occupies themselves in good deeds will be redeemed? This particular phraseology is talking about not the Torah itself, but the person who's occupied with the Torah. So again, on this verse, the Drush and Gemara of Brachos, when it's talking about these three things, it's not talking about the three things as they are in themselves. The diuk that the Rebbe is making here is talking about the one who's occupied in them. So that's the second question, right? One is, why are the three things divided into two categories? Two is, why are we talking about the person doing it as opposed to the things themselves? And by the way, you say, well, what's wrong with that? Because Lashon HaMorgal become makomas, because the normal language, which is used in many places, is that you usually just talk about the things themselves, not the person who's occupied with them. Where do you see that? Like it says in the Gemara, in the Mishnah of Pirkei Avos, al shlosh devarim ha'olam omen. Like it says, on three things the world stands: on Torah, on Avoda, and Gemulus Chasadim. It says the world stands on Torah, Avoda, and Gemulus Chasadim. It doesn't say the world stands on he who is occupied with those things. So we find many times when we talk about those three things and their uniqueness, we're just talking about those things. Why here in the Gemara of Brachas, on the Drasha here, does it emphasize the idea that it's the one occupied in those things and not the things themselves? Now the truth is, I'll be honest with you, those last two questions, this mimer is long, deep, and slightly complicated, I'll be honest with you, right? And in the end, he doesn't even answer those two questions. And so there's a sicha at the end of this mimer, which is also printed in this book, where he's like, okay, I asked a couple questions in this mimer, I never actually answered in the mimer, let me give you the answer. So the mimer is so filled with information that the actual beginning questions, at least those two, they don't even covered by the mimer. But so, when we finish the mimer, we'll also get to those two questions. I don't want you to get too caught up with them. Right now, we're just kind of understanding the basics of what does it really mean spiritually and chassidically for your soul to be redeemed in peace. Wow.